my friend's name was Nadine. I had a dream about Nadine, and it was just this strangest experience. I was like at this airport, and I was like sort of choosing between different paths. It was very fascinating. She was there. She wasn't saying anything. It was just, she just sort of seemed like she was happy and at peace. She was smiling, like there was nothing wrong. And it's almost like I was the one that was a little bit like jarred, or like, what's going on? What am I doing here? Like she's all calm, and I'm like, and I look over to my right. It's a very vivid dream I had. I look over to my right, and like I see like a departure gate, and like the plane's taking off, and we got to get out of here. And then I look over to my left, and I see a long hallway, not sure where it goes. Not like a dark and scary hallway. It was actually quite brightly lit, and the further I looked down the hallway, the brighter the light was actually. And I was like, do I get on this plane and leave, or do I walk away and walk down this hallway towards this light? And I walked towards the light.
You're listening to the Soo Podcast with your host, Ryan Keeney.
This is the place to hear from members of the Sault Ste. Marie community and beyond.
We're on a mission to give local voices a platform to share their stories and experiences.
Whether it's supporting small business, discussing local politics, or tracking real estate trends, find it all on the Soo Podcast.
Grace Swain is an Indigenous artist, advocate, and entrepreneur. She is from Swan Lake First Nation, Treaty 1 territory, and currently lives in Bruce Station, Ontario. She is known for her TikTok, where she has over 175,000 followers and talks about spirituality, wellness, and mindset. She is also the business owner of Anishinaabe Babe Inc. I like that, where she offers business coaching, content creation, and lead generation services for product-based and service-based businesses. Grace has also been accepted to be part of an exciting opportunity to be a facilitator with Changemaker X Change, where she'll be attending an in-person facilitator training in Italy in March. CXC is an organization that creates inclusive communities where changemakers come together to protect the planet and our environment. Through this organization, she has created an online art program that aims to remove economic and systemic barriers for professional Indigenous female artists to create and sell their traditional art. In this program, they learn how to access land-based materials, resources, knowledge, and financial assistance to create and sell traditional art. This program received over 900 applicants, and she loves keeping on going and supporting more Indigenous artists through her work. Welcome, Grace.
Hi, thanks for having me.
It's so very exciting to have you on the show.
I'm so excited. I love the setup.
We like it too. We put a lot of effort into putting
lots of lighting and
camera
everything. Angles.
Yeah.
You don't get to see stuff like that in the Soo very often.
No, I was on like a radio show one time when I went to Pine Ridge, South Dakota, but wasn't as fancy with the headphones and microphones and everything.
Well, when I saw your post on Facebook, and you were sort of reaching out to the local Soo community, and you were saying, look, this is what I'm about. This is the work that I do. It was one of those like support local businesses groups. So it was very, very much consistent with the theme and the content of that Facebook group. It's why I joined and I followed that group, because I want to connect with people who are doing interesting things in entrepreneurship and small business. So I saw your post, and you're like, I got accepted to this program. I have plans to travel to Italy. And, I've built this platform, based around this theme and this message. And as I was reading this, I was like, gosh, we got to get Grace on the show. Like, she seems like she'd have a lot of interesting things to talk about that from a perspective that I've personally never been exposed to, that I'd be really interested to learn about. And I imagine a lot of our audience would be interested to learn about as well. So tell us about yourself.
Yeah. So I always introduce myself in Ojibwe. So Buju, Ani, Grace, Indigenous Cause, Makwa and Dodam, Swan Lake First Nation, and Dune Jabra, Bruce Mines, and Dodanago. So what I just said is, hi, my name is Grace. I'm Bear Clan from Swan Lake First Nation, and currently I'm living in Bruce Mines, Ontario. But I live in Bruce Station, but I always say Bruce Mines because, people don't know where Bruce Mines is. So trying to explain where Bruce Station is, an even bigger stretch.
Yeah. When you sent me the text, you're like, I'm on my way from Bruce Station. I look over at Tracy. I was like, where is that? I'm like, that's like near the Soo, right? Yeah, it's not too far from the Soo.
That's near Thessalon.
Yeah.
Not as far as Thessalon, but
yeah, about 45 minutes away.
Yeah.
From the Soo.
Yeah. yeah, we're always making the trek back and forth. So it feels like nothing to me and my boyfriend now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when we were having our pre-show discussions, you told me that you do have a connection to the Sioux, though. I mean, right now you're living in the, sorry, what was it again?
Bruce Station?
Bruce Station.
Yeah.
Okay. Right now you're living in Bruce Station, but tell us about your connection to Sault Ste. Marie.
Yeah. So I grew up in Bruce Mines, and then when I got to high school, I moved to the Sioux with my mom. So I went to Superior Heights for a year, but most of my education was at St. Mary's. So shout out to St. Mary's. Love that high school. So I spent the majority of my teen years in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, and it was really awesome. There was so much support from the community, and especially I went to St. Mary's and I got involved with a lot of extracurricular activities. I found that, you know, so many people would give you so much help and support, and it was just like a great place to be. And I always loved running and the outdoors. So being surrounded by the nature and the trails, especially as an Indigenous woman, you know, my community on my father's side is like a 2-day drive away in Manitoba. So having those Indigenous connections here as well has always been really awesome.
What is the community on your father's side?
Yeah. So my father's from Swan Lake First Nation, as I've said earlier.
Right.
So that's in Manitoba. So my father grew up on reservation, but he raised all of us off reservation. And my mother's from Wacomico First Nation, which is only 3 hours away from here. It's on like near Manitoulin Island. So when we were kind of growing up, we both were living, you know, off reserve, as my parents were too. So my dad, once we kind of grew up, moved back to his reservation. And that's where all my grandparents, my aunts, my cousins are on his side of the family. So that connection has always been there, but we've definitely been reconnecting a lot in the past couple of years with him moving back. So that has been really awesome too.
Great. Sorry, you were in the middle of telling me about the work that you do, and then I went off on this thing about Bruce Station. Sorry about that. So
no, that's
continue.
Okay. That's awesome. Yeah, I find that I have a lot of connections to so many different areas, so it's great to explain that right off the bat because it can be kind of confusing.
Right.
But yeah, so as for my work and what I do, I find that I'm in a lot of different areas of expertise. So that's why I've kind of narrowed it down to kind of say like influencer, Indigenous advocate, and entrepreneur, because a lot of people in this area especially know me for my main business, which is called Anishinaabe Babe Inc. So in that business, I started when I was 18 years old. I'm 23 years old now.
Wow.
And through that business, I just really wanted to work online. I wanted to be my own boss, my own entrepreneur.
Right.
So through that, it's been so much fun. You know, I get to work from home and work with people from all over the world. So I create content for their businesses, videos. And when I first started my business, TikTok wasn't even a thing. When it did come out, I was like, oh, this is awesome. I'm gonna hop on this. So I grew that pretty quickly, which kind of helped back up my business, because then a lot of entrepreneurs and business owners were like, hey, I don't know how to make videos. I don't really understand this. So I really hopped in and started creating content for them. Then I also do business coaching. So alongside that, just showing them how to do it themselves in their own business. And then I also do some lead generation services for coaches and service-based businesses too.
Right. So if someone comes to you and they're like, look, I'm thinking about starting my own business. I've always been fascinated by entrepreneurship, the idea of, sort of controlling my own time and my own destiny and not necessarily being tied to a 9-to-5 job, stuff like that. And they come to you and they're like, you know, what are the first few things I should keep in mind as I start this journey? What is this going to look like for me and that kind of thing? Like I'm sure you get questions like that all the time. Like, so let's say hypothetically someone comes to you and asks you something like that. What would you tell them?
I love this question.
Okay.
My go-to answer is I always say start before you're ready. And the reason why I say that is because I think the biggest part about starting your own business, you know, people think it's going to be the money or the investment or the time. I would honestly say it's the mindset to just start, because we are really in our own way and in our own heads so afraid of what other people are going to think of us, our friends and family, showing up online. 9 times out of 10, the biggest obstacle I face when I first work with people is they're just afraid to post on social media. Like they're afraid to say like, this is my business, this is what I'm doing, because of that fear around their family and their friends just judging them. So I just help people overcome that mindset block. And I would say that's one of the biggest things when you're first starting.
And how would someone overcome that mindset block? Like what would the tips be that you would have for them?
Yeah. So like I said, start before you're ready. So I always say, dive into it. Like when I did my first live, you know, I was in my dorm room. I went to Western University in London, Ontario.
Okay.
And when I was in my dorm room, I was terrified. I was on Instagram. I was going to do an Instagram live. And I just remember shaking. Like I was so nervous to do this live. Now I love guest speaking. I love doing lives. I love being on, social media and being active there. So I always tell people it gets easier the more you do it. When you first start, it's going to feel really scary, and that's completely normal.
Right.
So I always say that's one tip. Another tip that I always have is to go live with someone else. So whether you're going on, Instagram or on TikTok, or you're doing guest speaking, it helps to have someone else there to organically have conversation with.
Right.
Because then you don't feel like you're just talking to yourself in a screen.
Yeah.
So that's another tip I always give to people too. Cool.
Very cool.
Yeah.
It's making me think about this experience that I had when I was very early in my own entrepreneurship journey. When, I had just gotten my license to practice law. I was a freshly minted 26-year-old lawyer, and I really, really wanted to start my own law firm. And the idea, it wasn't so much about living that Hollywood lifestyle that you see on TV shows like Suits and stuff like that. It was more just the idea for me of being able to sort of control my own life. I didn't want to be tied down to a job working for someone else. I wanted to work for me. So, it's funny what you mentioned, how there's some consideration of how other people close to you are going to react to that decision. Mm-hmm. I can definitely say for myself, when I made that choice, my parents looked at me and they were like, "You're out of your mind. Like, we don't think this is good, right? Like, you should go work somewhere for a while. Mm-hmm. You should further develop your skills. You're very early in your career. Once you have more experience and some more credibility and stuff, think about starting your own firm later on down the road." And that's not bad advice. I imagine a lot of lawyers do that, mm-hmm. but it doesn't have to be that way. I thought to myself, well, I can still focus on learning. I can still focus on growth. I can still focus on obtaining experience and getting mentors and learning while being self-employed from day one. Mm-hmm. And just be very honest with my clients about, this is my level of experience. If you want to hire a lawyer with more experience, you can go find one. But if you want to hire a lawyer with this level of experience, I'm your person for that. And that was just one of the best career moves I've ever made in my life. Looking back, I'm so glad that I did that. So I think the whole idea of starting before you feel entirely ready, I feel like I did that, and it worked out amazing for me. So
yeah,
I followed your advice many, many years before I ever even met you.
Yeah. And it's something that, I always give that advice because it's something that I resonate with too. Because when I first went to university, I had this idea, I'm going to be a dentist. And I know we had talked about this before, but just for the listeners, I had always said, I'm going to be a dentist. And I think it was just engraved in my mind from a very young age that the only way you can make money is if you're a dentist, a doctor, or a lawyer. And neither of my parents had gone to university. I think, my dad had gone to college, and he was the first generation in his family. So my sister and I were the first generation in our family to go to university. So that was all they kind of were taught, right? So when I went to university in my first semester, I was failing half my classes. I ended up dropping out of that program entirely. I was in science because I was like, I'm going to be a dentist. And I realized really quickly that, I didn't really love science. It wasn't what I was personally passionate about. But what I was passionate about was the idea of being my own boss, being an entrepreneur, having my own team. So once I realized, okay, that was what I was chasing, then I kind of switched out of that. And I just followed that dream, started my business right away so that after university, I could just pursue that full time. And exactly what you're saying, there was so many people who were telling me that is such a bad idea. You're not going to make any money. What are you doing? Hiring mentors in that field? You're a student. You don't have a lot of money to begin with. You have student loans and debt. Right. And I just said, you know what? I'm going to start now, before I'm ready. Yeah. So that by the time I graduate, I'm not years behind. I'm kind of ahead. So. Yeah. And in just 5 years of this journey, it seems like you've come a long way. You seem very confident in what you do, and you've built these platforms. As I read through the Facebook post, as going back to that topic, and I just visited a few of your platforms and stuff, and just learned a little bit more. I didn't just read the post and be like, oh, this is great. I went to the different places that you sort of directed people to, and then I was like, you know what? I think I want to take some of the funds from our podcast, some of the operating budget from this business that we're running, and use it to support the work that you're doing. So yeah, the Sue podcast is one of your supporters.
and we're helping with your facilitator training in Italy. Tell us more about that. That's really exciting.
Yes.
I would love to go to Italy. I've never been. I've been to other places in the world that I've talked about on this podcast, but like definitely Italy is on the list.
Yes, I'm so excited. And thank you so, so much, Chimagwech, for being a sponsor and supporting me in that. That's been so, so helpful. But yeah, so I actually had gone to a previous training with CXC where I went to New York. And that was my first time going there too. So a lot of traveling with this organization. But
Yep.
funny enough, it came up in a Facebook ad. And I'm all about manifestation. And on
Yeah.
my vision board, I actually had on there, go to New York. So
Yeah.
I wasn't sure how it was going to happen or how it would kind of come into reality, but it came up through that ad. And they were just saying that they were looking for change makers or people passionate about helping the earth and the environment. And I said, oh man, this is me. Like, I
Right.
need to go and apply for this opportunity. So I applied, I got accepted. I went to New York and it was really incredible. I met so many like-minded individuals and youth and women who are just on the same journey. You know, it can be really isolating starting your own businesses, your own nonprofit, and doing that work. So through that connection, I met someone else who had leftover funding in their organization. And they said, hey, like, do you want to use this for your kind of programming, your funding? And I said, yes, absolutely. So that was
Of
when,
course.
yeah, I was like, who doesn't? So I whipped together this program because it had to be done by a certain timeline. So we just finished wrapping that up, but it was really incredible. And essentially it's this 4-week online program that helped Indigenous women just remove those economic and systemic barriers to help them with their art. I've loved art. I've always been really into art. And I come from a family of artists as well. And I found that over the past couple months, you know, getting into art, if you don't have those tools really at your fingertips, is really difficult because they're really expensive. It's hard to access resources, and
Right.
especially for a lot of Indigenous peoples who, you know, live in remote communities or they don't have access to Wi-Fi and they can't watch tutorials. So yeah, so we started that program and we had Indigenous guest speakers come on and a lot locally as well, which was really awesome, from Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario.
Amazing.
And they were just teaching other Indigenous artists how to sell their art online. I, of course, talked about social media and marketing online.
Amazing.
But we had other guest speakers coming on and just teaching traditional teachings as well to help people reconnect with the culture and the land-based art and how they can integrate that in their art. So it was a really awesome experience. So through this program, I'm just hoping to keep it going, and CXC has been a big part of that too.
Traveling for your career is just one of the most exciting things. I've done it before. For me, I was very, very passionate for a long time. There was a chapter in my life. I'm done with that work now, but there was a chapter in my life where I was very much into TED Talks. And I
Cool.
was a TEDx organizer. I've mentioned it on another episode of this podcast, so I'm not going to dive into it all over again. But for the sake of this conversation, like I traveled to Alberta for a conference where TEDx organizers from all around the world were there, and we were talking about sort of like the future of what that was going to look like, and it felt like, you know, you're part of this global movement where, you know, this is not look, for me, it wasn't my day job, it wasn't my primary career, it was a passion, it was a hobby, and I'm taking that hobby and buying a plane ticket, going to this faraway place where I don't know anybody, and meeting these really, really incredible people. And I was thinking about that experience that I had as you were telling me about your trip to New York, and just that atmosphere. Like that, I'm assuming that was New York City, not just the state of New York. But like,
Yeah, New York City.
yeah. And I've never been to New York City. I'd love to go. I've sort of escaped the big city life as I moved from the GTA to Northern Ontario because I wanted like a simpler life. But like, I think for sort of like a vacation or maybe like a working vacation, that would be a really, really fascinating place to go. And I just imagine being in that environment, doing the kind of work that you're passionate about. And that must have been really exhilarating.
Yeah, it was awesome. So I went to New York City, and they actually drove us a couple hours outside the city to like a retreat center to be in nature because we
wow.
are, of course, you know,
That's
advocates for the earth. So that was really, really awesome, and just connecting in that capacity. But I took a few extra days to just explore New York City while I was there because I had never been before. And my mom actually surprised me and came with me for those last few days. So
Nice.
we got to spend some time there, and that was her first time there too. So it was really cool.
You were telling me about an organization that took an interest in your work, and they said, you know, we've got some extra funding. We want to help support this. Tell me more about what that looked like. Like, you know, what if you can, like what the name
Yeah.
of their organization was, how that all came about, what you ended up doing with the funding. That's, I think a lot of people would find that interesting.
Yeah, so it was really awesome. So that's actually based out of Toronto, was the woman who had reached out to me. And it's through their organization called Innovate My Future. And I can send you like more information on them to go and
Cool.
support them and check them out.
Okay.
But yeah, it was a really awesome organization that's passionate about supporting the earth. And essentially what they do is they help other, young people from across Ontario with their nonprofits and their efforts and their organizations. So whether that has to do with protecting the earth or in my capacity, helping Indigenous women with the land-based art, whatever capacity it kind of went into. And they also help with social justice issues as well. So they've helped a ton of people with their projects, like just across Ontario. So they have a lot of cool work going on their end of things too.
That's really cool.
But yeah. And the organizer who I'd met in New York City, her name's Nicole. She is so cool.
Hi, Nicole.
Yeah, she is such an amazing woman, just really passionate about helping the earth, helping the planet. And it was incredible because she's also so young, and just seeing the work that she's doing and starting her organization and just, helping so many other people with theirs really inspired me in my work as well. When I came back to Ontario and just kind of thinking about, okay, like I have my business, I have what I do, but how can I, aside from that, use it to give back to my community? Because being Indigenous, we always talk about, giving back to your community, helping other Indigenous peoples, and kind of looking at the greater picture.
Right.
And I always talk about, the 7 generations teachings, how Indigenous peoples are always looking 7 generations ahead, which is crazy to think about. But it's the idea of essentially protecting the planet and our people so that, selflessly helping other, Indigenous peoples down the road, not just Indigenous peoples, but our earth and our planet and the people who we're never even going to meet. So that's really awesome.
You call it the
idea too.
7 generations teachings?
Yeah. So it kind of comes back to the 7 grandfather teachings as well, but we always call it, 7 generations, just thinking 7 generations ahead.
I've never heard of any of this stuff, and I find it so fascinating. So like the idea is, if I'm hearing you correctly, it's sort of like a cultural value where you look at, okay, the work that I'm doing and the impact that I'm having in my life, how is this going to impact my great-grandchildren, my great-great-grandchildren? Like you're looking at a timeline that's just so much larger than what we would sort of be accustomed to in North America. I feel like in, traditional sort of North American society, we think about, the next generation. We're like, I'm going to set up my maybe it's my personal wealth or whatever so that my children are taken care of. But that's sort of where it stops, like, and then of course your grandchildren, whatever, but like you don't, after the time horizon sort of reaches the end of your own life, people sort of seem to, I don't know how I would put it. Like they certainly wouldn't be thinking 7 generations ahead. At least that's just not the climate that we're raised in. Right. Like I find that very fascinating.
Yeah, exactly. And I talk about this a lot too, so I don't want to go too much into a tangent, but
right.
I always say, there's this colonial versus decolonial way of thinking. And Indigenous peoples, we always think in the cyclical sense, whereas Western society thinks in a very individualistic nature. So exactly what you're saying, how we'll think about, our children, maybe our grandchildren, but then that's it. It kind of comes back to the idea of everyone for themselves, that individualistic nature. Indigenous peoples, and what I've been taught in my culture, is thinking about not just yourself, but your community, and, understanding that we're stronger together when we support each other, just like you're supporting me in my endeavors, and coming on and supporting you. Right. So it's more coming back to that. We're stronger together in community, and that cyclical nature of what goes around comes back around, right? So, I always say, we need the planet doesn't need us, right? So that's why when we think about the 7 generations, it's also not just thinking about the planet's role, but also the role that we're playing to kind of give back as well.
Yeah. It sounds to me that like this is almost this way of thinking, how you refer to it, the sort of like decolonial way of thinking. We are in a place now as a society where, obviously mental health is a big topic right now. We've seen a huge decline in people's mental health during and coming out of the pandemic and all that. And that's probably going to have ramifications for many years to come. And it almost seems to me that a more cohesive, community-minded way of living might just be the remedy that we need to tackle things like depression and isolation, social isolation, and the suffering and the pain that a lot of people are going through privately. Like when I use words like suffering and pain, I'm not referring to like, war zones or like, countries where there's no infrastructure to meet people's basic physical needs. I'm talking about the suffering that you see, everyday average Canadians going through, where sure, they're employed, they're paying the bills, they have a roof over their head, they have food on the table, but there's something missing in their existence that is making life unhappy.
Yeah.
So it's sort of looking at things somewhat differently. Yeah. I think people need that.
Yeah, 100%. And it's exactly that, that individualistic nature also comes back to the idea that when people are struggling, to not ask for help, right? That's another kind of Western mindset, is that, oh, you're weak. It's the sign of, you're not being strong if you're reaching out for help. Whereas we, and we're working at this as Indigenous peoples, because obviously there's a lot of, colonialism that has happened. But essentially the idea, when I talked to an elder about it, I said, why is there so much pain in the world, especially for youth and Indigenous youth? And she kind of said, because there's that disconnect from our identity, who we are as peoples, from the culture, from the teaching. So when we kind of ground ourselves, and this goes for anyone, right, in your identity and your community, having that support, it really, really helps you along the way in your journey. So I would say, yeah, most definitely for a lot of young Canadians, especially, suffering in silence is really, really hard. But when you have that community and you have elders and you have people to back you up, then we're stronger together.
Right. Yeah, I totally believe that. Yeah. And how it does this, if at all, how does this sort of worldview help inform the art that you create and the content that you create as an artist, right? And I use the word artist broadly. I don't mean that to mean like just painting pictures. Like I mean, I think content creation in general is a form of art. Whether you're making documentaries or you're making, social media videos or whatever, you're expressing yourself. And it sounds like from what you're telling me, there's often a lot of depth to it. So I guess the question stands. It's like, so how does this sort of worldview help inform the art, no matter how broadly you define that term? How does it inform the art that you're creating?
Yeah, you're full of great questions.
Thank you.
But yeah, because I always say, my culture, and I always say by virtue of my culture, I've kind of grown up just spiritual through that, because my parents were always very supportive of the idea that, with your culture, your spirituality, your identity. Whereas I find with some of my friends, their parents might be like, oh, that's crazy, or you should shove that away. They were very embracing of that. So I've kind of brought that into all aspects of my life. And I think, when it comes to the work that I'm doing, teaching other people not that rest is important. You cannot pour from an empty cup, because again, this Western mindset of working to the point of burnout where you just can't function anymore is just, it's not realistic for a lot of people. And a lot of clients that I take on, they really, really appreciate that mindset, because I'm not here, shoving down their throats. Okay, well, if you haven't been working 24/7, then that's your fault. Like you should, you're failing because of that. Instead,
like the hustle mindset.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And not to say, hard work pays off, and I'm all for that. But I always say that, you want to work smarter, not harder. So whenever I look at people's businesses, I kind of see, okay, where are the missing gaps? How can we kind of fill this in to save you time or to save you money so that you're not having to work 24/7. And in terms of, the art and the content that I create, I kind of like to incorporate Indigenous teachings, and a lot of what I'm talking about today, the colonial versus decolonial mindset, I try to integrate as much as possible. But even in my art, it comes up a lot, and a lot of, and in the practical sense, and a lot of paintings as well that I create too.
Right.
But yeah, I would say it informs like every aspect of my work. No matter what I'm doing, I'm kind of always thinking about, how am I prioritizing rest in my life? How am I giving back to my community? How am I coming back to my culture? And how am I giving back to the earth as well?
Right. And like, how does one do that? I know I sound like a complete like fool.
No, it's okay.
Asking a question like that. Like I was like, okay, well, this guy's got like about 2 brain cells. But like literally when I'm sitting here thinking about this, I'm like, how do I little old me sitting at my, I work from home. So I go down to my basement, sit in front of my computer, type whatever. And then I manage some of my investments and stuff. And my day's pretty average, right? Like, so how does, the everyday ordinary person, take on a responsibility like that sounds as large or as lofty as like giving back to the earth?
Mm-hmm. I get this question a lot, especially with the 7 generations. It can feel very overwhelming to a lot of people, right?
Right.
So I always break it down and say, every little step helps, but something that I've incorporated a lot into my daily routine is just getting out in nature. So whether it's just getting out for an hour and walking my dog or just stepping outside and just saying thank you to the earth. And I always say, like, in our culture, we have a medicine called tobacco. And it's used to show gratitude. You give it to elders if they give you, knowledge. It's used in ceremonies. But when you go on walks, whenever you take from the earth, like let's say, for example, I find a piece of birch bark on the ground and I want to paint on it or use it for beadwork, then I like to, in exchange, give back to the earth. So I always carry some tobacco ties on me, lay it on the ground, say a prayer to the earth, thank the earth for everything that it's doing for us before you take from it. And if you're not Indigenous, you don't have that tobacco on you, I always say, if you do take from the earth, or even if you're not taking from the earth, if you're on your walk and you see garbage and you want to pick it up, if you just are on a walk and you want to say thank you to the earth. My boyfriend always thinks that this is a strange idea, but I've gotten him into it too. But, speaking to the trees, speaking to the world around you and just getting finer tuned connected to that as well can just be a simple step in just having a deeper appreciation for your surroundings and being more present in this moment.
Yeah. You know what that reminds me of, what you just said was, I hear so much talk about the importance of practicing like intentional gratefulness and gratitude for in the mental health space, where it's like, so much of the negative self-talk and the thoughts that go through our mind, which are toxic to ourselves, a lot of it has to do with focusing on what we don't have, our problems. Yeah. If I just had this, or if it was just this way, I could be happy or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. And that way of thinking sort of consumes your mental bandwidth and doesn't leave room for focusing on being grateful for things. Yeah. Like you were saying, like thanking nature, thanking the earth for like giving you this opportunity to walk through this, beautiful park or whatever, right? Like
exactly.
And then, to me, I feel like it just sounds like there's practical applications to that for like what I was talking about earlier, what a lot of people are going through. Yeah, I find that very fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's so funny you bring it up, because I was talking to my dad the other day. I talk to him all the time, even though he's in Manitoba, we're still very close.
Right.
And we were talking about, when you focus on the lack, it attracts more lack, and how when
you focus on the lack, it attracts more lack. Sorry, I do not like interrupting. I'm sorry I interrupted you.
No, that's okay.
I have to say that again. When you focus on, I am so guilty of that. Okay, I'm gonna stop. I'm gonna hold back my reaction. Finish what you were saying, and then I'm gonna tell you how exciting I found that.
Absolutely. And that was exactly what my dad and I were saying. And, he talked about his own life, and he said, he grew up in Manitoba on the prairies, and him and his family were very, very poor. So they worked for a potato farm. They weren't like farming their own potatoes. And, my dad growing up, he had to leave school a couple months early and wasn't able to participate in extracurriculars just to go and help his family on the farm so that they would have enough money to live. And he always said to me, because I said, my grandparents, like my grandfather passed, but my grandmother is always just full of love. They're always so happy. Every time we went and saw them, it was like nothing was wrong, right? There may have been some obviously hardships they went through, but they were always so positive and so loving and so grateful. And I said this to him, and he said, it's funny because growing up, his mother would always tell him, we're so grateful. We are so like full of love, and we're so lucky the life we're living. And I feel so bad for people that are homeless or that are poor. And my dad was laughing to me because he said, yeah, and I think back on that, and he goes, and we were poor, we were dirt poor. And here she is saying like feeling bad for these other people that have less than us, right? So he kind of was reflecting back on that and saying, yeah, exactly. If you focus on the lack, it attracts more lack. But she was always, and I always say, she was the richest person, and we always are like the richest person we know because we were just surrounded by their love and their energy.
The reason I got so excited when you said that, because it summed up my life. Not right now, certainly not right now, but there were previous chapters of my life where, I had parts of my life that I was so just tunnel visioned on what I didn't have, what was lacking, as you put it, and it's just a silly irony that during those times in my life, I had just an extraordinary abundance in certain departments and certain chapters, like certain places. Yeah. I wasn't concerned about that. I was concerned in the very narrow things where I was lacking. And it almost, when I was living through those chapters of my life, it just felt like there was just an empty void everywhere I looked. And I was just completely not thinking about just the extraordinary abundance that existed in like other parts of my life. And now I look back on it and I'm like, wow, like how silly was I being? Yeah. I mean, again, part of it just comes with age or whatever. Like I'm 35 now. And like when I was in my 20s, it wasn't as clear. Obviously, it's very clear to you. So you're about a decade earlier than I was figuring this stuff out. But, life experience also teaches you, all on its own if you don't have the benefit of like as you put it, like an elder to talk to or whatever.
Yeah. And I always say, I preach this a lot, but there are days where I come back to that too. And I'm guilty of, focusing on the negative. And, that was part of my call with my dad was just, grounding me and just telling me, no, like you got to be grateful. Like you have so much to be grateful for. And then it really makes you stop and think, yeah, I do have so much to be grateful for. And, and there was even a book that I read from Garen Jones. It was called Change Your Mindset, Change Your Life. And he was homeless. And I know earlier I kind of talked about homelessness, but he talked about how even from, in that point in his life, he was able to change his mindset and just focus on the gratitude, just like we're talking today. Right. And now he has like a multi-million-dollar business. So
good for him.
It's a really awesome, book to read because it kind of talks about that again, right? Like, if you focus on the lack, it'll attract the lack. But if you focus on the good and you just continue to be grateful and present, then it just keeps growing from there too.
Yeah. That's really cool.
Always something to be grateful for.
Yeah. I definitely need to internalize that more.
I think we all do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Today, well, not actually, no, in a few days, it's going to be Jason's 18th birthday.
Yep. 24th.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. On the 24th, he's turning, he's going to be a fully fledged adult. Just the same age you were when you started your business.
Yeah.
So we were, we surprised Jay today.
Big time surprise.
Focusing on like an abundance mindset, at least for Jay right now.
Yeah.
So we told him, Tracy and I told him that we were gonna we needed his help at the Toyota dealership, that we were gonna take our RAV4 in for servicing, and we don't know anything about cars, and he knows a lot more, so we just want to make sure we have someone there who knows what's what. So that was our excuse. So we picked
complete lie.
Yeah, it was a complete lie. It was a complete lie. So we picked him up from his co-op placement. He's helping build a
Legion/apartment building.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
Electrical over there. That's kind of cool. So we picked him up from his co-op placement. We drove over to the Toyota dealership, and we surprised him with a
brand new truck.
Yeah,
brand new truck.
Yeah, a Toyota Tacoma.
Yep.
Yeah. Very, very exciting stuff. And Jay and I do a lot of like real estate renovation stuff together. I mentioned it on previous episodes.
That's awesome.
So this is it's gonna help with that kind of thing, but it's also, it's a fun toy to have for a young guy.
It is.
Yeah.
Very useful. Very useful.
Yeah. And is that your first vehicle?
No. It's my second vehicle.
Yeah.
It's still awesome though.
Yeah. I had an old Yaris that's still in the yard, but yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, my boyfriend's a mechanic, and he just got a truck. So he loves
Amazing.
Every guy loves their trucks.
Yes, my
They're the
second
best.
truck. Because I have one at my house, at my Tesla house still, in the garage, unfinished.
They're awesome. I love them too because you know what? They're very practical, especially in Northern Ontario. If you need to haul stuff or get around the snow,
for sure.
especially,
Down south,
they're awesome.
Yeah.
Down south.
Not so much, but
Not so
here
much.
you kind of need them.
Yeah. But I mean, so it's related to what we're talking about in the sense that like, my experience with Jay, and I don't think I've talked about this on the podcast before, but like, he's a young guy he's Tracy's son who, they've seen their fair share of like ups and downs in life. You've been through some stuff that's, I won't go into the details on the podcast, but life hasn't always been easy. And you seem to have always kept, a really positive mindset through it. Certainly when I was your age, I wouldn't have been conducting myself in as mature of a fashion as you have. So good job on that. And
Thank you.
like we get through these things together where it's like, okay, well, we got to tackle this situation. Then Jay helps us out with a positive attitude. And then like, we got to tackle the next situation. And it's like when you live your life like that, where you're like, you know what, yeah, maybe stuff's hard right now, but I'm going to approach it in this way that is healthy and pays attention to the big picture, and takes care of the people around me. Abundance sort of finds its way to you. And, I think that the universe, I'm not particularly a religious person, but I do think that there's some order to the universe. I do think that there's some coincidences that can't be explained. And sometimes I've been on the receiving end of good karma through the universe. And I'm just saying there like, wow, how could such an amazing thing have happened? And sometimes, which I actually think might be just as or more exciting, I get to be witness to it, where I'm watching someone else's life totally change in front of my eyes. And maybe I have some level of participation in that to a greater or lesser extent. But it's really fun to watch stuff like that unfold.
Yeah, absolutely.
And having an awareness of that spirituality, that part of our existence, I think it feels very enriching.
Yeah, absolutely. And, that's one of the best parts. I loved what you said about, there's your experiences, but seeing other people have those positive experiences or being a part of that or even a little impact on their lives is so rewarding in that experience. It's the best feeling, I think.
Yeah, totally.
So yeah, that's amazing. It's like at Christmas, gifts are nice, but I love giving gifts. I love watching people open the gifts. It's the best part for me.
Yeah. We had a great Christmas this year.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah, it was good.
That was fun.
The tree up, all these gifts, and even Nana, our dog.
Yeah.
We had some gifts wrapped for him as well.
Aww. Such a cute dog.
Yeah, well, when he behaves himself, yeah. Sometimes he can be just so spiteful.
Or very excited in some areas, yeah.
Well, he's a husky. Huskies are not known for being very well-behaved animals.
They're outdoor dogs. Come on.
Yeah, a lot of energy.
A lot of wolf in them.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny because I always think it's when you're talking about like the 7 generations, you're like, that's so cool. It's so funny because when I went to New York, they actually had like a surprise session where they're like, okay, everyone's going to basically host their own like information sessions and just teach us about something for 20 minutes. And everyone's panicking, especially, the people who are really big planners. They're going, oh my goodness, what am I going to teach about? And I was just throwing out ideas and I wrote down like, colonial versus decolonial thinking and kind of that linear versus like non-linear mindset. And I was like, oh, no one's going to care about this. And every single person was interested and wanted to hear about it. So I always find it interesting when I talk about this, how many people are like, whoa, I've never even heard about that before. And in particular, the 7 generations, a lot of people were interested in that too. So I found that really interesting.
Yeah, like I can imagine. Like it's just, we just get so much of the same constantly. Like people are being programmed by what they see on Netflix, right?
Yeah.
Like I don't know, they get their relationship cues from like a show like Bridgerton, and then they get their ideas of the kind of what their house should look like from like TV shows like Selling Sunset. And like you've got this, like all of it is just such a distorted representation of how life actually works. It's just the whole thing just boggles my mind.
Yeah.
But I think people are crying out for something that feels more authentic, something that feels more in tune with how we are as human beings just by default, like absent any sort of like media programming or whatever.
So essentially, like when I talk about the medicine wheel, it's essentially, and I paint this all the time in my art too, but in my culture, it's like a wheel that has 4 quadrants and it's all exact. And there's red, white, black, and yellow. And the idea is it's all equal and it represents, all of us together in this world. So there's no beginning, no end, no one is above or below each other. And we all have to work together to essentially achieve harmony and peace with one another. And in each of these quadrants, it also, has its own sacred medicine attached to it. And it also has a teaching. So it really represents your mind, body, your spirit, and your heart. So when I talk about I mean, I integrate this into everything. I'm always like, it can be integrated into your work, your wellness, your mindset, school, whatever aspect of your life you're trying to integrate it. But I always challenge people with this because I always challenge people to think about, not just thinking about your physical self and, taking it further from your mental self, but what does your soul need? What does your heart need? What is your purpose that you're kind of working towards, or what lights you up or makes you happy? Because I find that oftentimes, especially in today's society, we're so estrayed from that. We're afraid to embrace that other aspect of ourselves. So that's kind of the idea of, the medicine wheel in that holistic wellness kind of sphere.
Yeah, I liked how when you were telling me that story earlier, you said we have this medicine called tobacco. I'm assuming that's the same tobacco everybody, like there's nothing different about the word tobacco in that context versus tobacco you'd find in like a cigarette or something. Or is there a difference?
Yeah, there is. So the tobacco that's kind of in a cigarette, I'm pretty sure it's like processed, it has the nicotine and everything added to it. The tobacco that we're talking about, it's completely natural tobacco. And, when we talk about this sacred medicine, we're not, having it in cigarettes and smoking it, because I find that's a common misconception.
Like there needs to be some clarity on that.
but yeah, it's like pure tobacco. But yeah, there's actually 4 sacred medicines. So there's sweetgrass, sage, tobacco, and cedar. So every one of these medicines, and again, I always say I don't speak for every nation across Turtle Island. I'm Ojibwe, so I just speak about the knowledge I've been taught. But for me, what I've kind of been taught with these teachings is that each medicine serves a purpose and has kind of a representation to help us. So sweetgrass especially is essentially, we talk a lot about our hair and like the major role that hair plays in our culture. And if anyone's watching, you can kind of see I have very long hair right now. But it's a teaching within our culture that, you grow your hair long and you grow it proudly and strongly, and that your spirit and your soul is attached into that hair. And oftentimes when we encounter trauma or someone in your family passes away, you cut that hair because, all that energy is attached into it so you can start anew. It's like having that transformation, starting again, new beginnings. So, that sweetgrass, it kind of imitates the hair and that braid. And, there's another teaching attached to braiding hair as well. But the idea kind of comes back to the idea that when you're braiding your hair, you think with good intentions, good energy, because that's kind of, setting your intention for the day. And if you're braiding someone else's hair, you want to have good intentions and putting that positive energy into it as well. So it's kind of like the sweetgrass and the hair and how it all comes together, because sweetgrass is often like braided when we have it.
That's very interesting. You know what that makes me think of? Like this symbolism and meaning that people in certain communities and cultures ascribe to hair. Mm-hmm. It reminds me of this like sort of like religious ritual that I learned about from my dad. He is a Muslim. I don't subscribe to any religion, and I don't identify as a follower of any religion, but this is his. And he, when I was much younger, he would, talk to me about his faith system, and he told me about this ritual where you make this pilgrimage to this city that's considered holy to people who follow his religion and that sort of thing. And they, I don't know the details of it, but they perform their rituals in I think it's called Mecca or whatever, and then they go there, and one of the parts of this ritual, leading back to the topic of hair, is for the men to shave their heads. And I don't know like what the intended symbolism is behind it in that faith tradition. And I'm not going to pretend to sit here and speculate. It's not really the point of my bringing it up. It just, it reminded me, like, when you said, if you go through something in your life where there's this negative energy, these past experiences, you can leave that behind you by doing this symbolic act of cutting the hair. Mm-hmm. And then I was like, oh wait, where have I heard that before? Like it's almost as if like the shaving of the head is like you're starting anew, and then you're going back out into the world, with the same head of hair you had as a baby, I guess, you didn't have, and none of us really, I mean, I guess some babies come out with hair on their head, but like, I'm assuming most of them don't.
Yeah. But yeah, no, and it's funny because even, not in Indigenous culture, I always, it's a joke, but for a lot of women, they always make the joke that, oh, whenever I go, you see women going through a breakup or in movies, especially or rom-coms, the first thing they do is they get the scissors and they they give themselves these bangs and they cut their hair off really short.
Yep.
And it's funny because I always bring that up,
Yeah.
not to make fun of that by any means, but to essentially say that, there's a reason why the first instinct you have when you go through a breakup, that negative energy or that trauma or whatever's associated to it, your first instinct is kind of associated with cutting that hair because you associate it with that renewal, shedding that negative energy and kind of starting that new chapter.
Yeah.
So it's similar to the Indigenous teachings that I was kind of talking about earlier. And it's funny how it's represented across media, that's not even tied to that too.
Yeah, I was just thinking that because like you see that in Hollywood.
Yeah.
And it's not as if this Hollywood content is doing it, for any kind of, at least it doesn't seem to me that they're doing it for like spiritual reasons. It just seems like arbitrarily built into the pop culture that this is something people do.
Yeah.
And now that I'm looking at it in a different way, I'm thinking, is this coming from a place where perhaps our minds and our bodies and our souls just naturally want to do certain things without us even knowing why? We're just inclined towards that behavior when we are trying to refresh ourselves, when we're trying to move on from something.
Yeah.
Huh.
It's a really interesting teaching. And it's funny because when I was a kid, I always had really long hair. I mean, I have long hair now, but when I was a kid, it was really long. And I didn't have, I had trims and everything, but it was always in a braid down my back. And I had my first haircut, I would say, when I was in like grade 1 or 2. And, growing up, I usually grow it out for like a year or 2. I chop it off and I donate it, and then I kind of cut it short again. And I always get a lot of reactions, especially from women saying, what, you're going to cut your hair off? Like, people are very attached to their hair, I've come to realize. And I've just always been one of those people where I'm like, no, I'm just going to cut it. It'll grow back. Like, it grows fast. But it's so interesting seeing the attachment a lot of people have to their hair. And, it's a great way of identity and expression, especially for a lot of people when they're dyeing it and they're cutting it and all these rituals that are associated with just like our hair alone.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, and unequivocally. It's sort of like, when we live in a society that puts so much value and social worth on our exterior appearance, like your weight or like the color of your hair, the length of your hair, or your height or whatever it is, right? Like, there's all these things. I mean, people spend thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars on cosmetic surgery just to look a certain way. They want to change the shape of their nose and stuff like that. Like I have some content on TikTok where I took a trip to Turkey where my original intention was to pursue exactly that stuff. And then through the journey of traveling, I was like, I don't think I even need this or want this. And then that trip turned out to be so much more spectacular and so much more life-changing than had I just followed through with the cosmetic changes. But the reason I say all this is like, we're so invested in our outward appearance that chopping off your hair, maybe temporarily, looking a way that you think is less than the ideal or whatever, it scares people. Whereas, from what you're describing, it's less so about looking one way or the other, but more so about, being able to have the experience of making a donation of that kind, being able to have the experience of spiritual rejuvenation and that kind of thing. Like it's more than just the outward appearance.
Yeah. And I always say too, with our hair especially, I think it's comforting to know, well, for me anyways, that when I can cut my hair off, I'm grateful enough that it will just like grow back. And I think that's a great teaching in itself too, right? That, we'll bounce back. It's okay. It's not forever. I mean, I definitely love my hair, so it is a little bit, I will admit, for aesthetic reasons. But no, I'm just teasing. But for the most part, honestly, I've decided to grow it out because my dad and my brother, they started growing their hair out long when my cousin Garnet committed suicide a couple years back.
Oh, no.
And the reason why they decided to grow their hair out was kind of paying tribute to him and just honoring his life and his spirit and just celebrating his life. So when they started growing their hair out, I thought, wow, that's beautiful that they're reconnecting to the culture and they're
Right.
growing their hair out again. Especially, in a society where, unfortunately, in the past, like our hair was something that, was cut, in residential schools and we
Right.
weren't allowed to have long hair.
Right.
So I think, especially for the men being able to grow their hair out long in our culture, it's like a sign of, defiance, of strength, of reconciliation
Oh,
and
wow.
healing. So yeah, it has a lot of like meaning behind it. So when I
Yeah.
saw them growing out the hair, I thought, you know what, I'm going to grow my hair out too. So
Right.
now it's, as sad as that was, I think it was beautiful to be able to honor his spirit in that way.
Right.
And then what's even more awesome is when I go and visit them, we have all these photos of all of us with our long hair.
Right.
And I think that just is so awesome. So yeah, I mean, obviously not, the experience itself, where it came from was a sad experience. But I think being able to take that and, using it as a way to not only honor him, but, embrace the culture and the heritage. And again, having those teachings so that when we come back together in community, we're able to mourn in the way where we're not by ourselves. And like you said earlier, feeling, lost and not being able to know how to proceed forward. Even that act alone, like, helped us so much come together as community and heal from it.
Do you feel comfortable telling us more about your cousin who passed
Yeah.
away?
Yeah, absolutely. So my cousin Garnet, so he was on a reservation in Swan Lake, Manitoba. So not living on the reservation, but a couple minutes away in a community called Swan Lake.
Okay.
So we had always grown up, like when we were kids, he was similar in age to my brother, and we'd always go and visit and see him. And I actually hadn't seen him for a couple of years, but the year before it had happened, me and my sister got to go to Swan Lake and actually spend, a couple of weeks with him and just visiting him. And that was really, I'm super grateful for that, because otherwise, we wouldn't really have a recent memory of him. But, when he did pass and that did kind of happen, it was interesting to see how, I find in Western culture, again, like that individualistic nature of, okay, you kind of come together for a bit, but then people are on their own and then they kind of mourn it, by themselves. It's kind of how I recognize it. But in our family, in our community, the community comes together, everyone kind of helps themselves out. He didn't have a traditional funeral because he wasn't really, as my dad kind of explains it, he wasn't really ascribing to like the Indigenous culture, and we just didn't feel like he wanted that traditional funeral in that sense. However, they did, come together in community and help one another. And even then, like thereafter, like my grandmother is always spending the day with my aunts and my aunties, and my cousins are always in one space. So I think that was so, so crucial for my aunt, especially when her son passed, is being able to have everyone come together and have that community and have that support so that you're not, in total isolation when something like that happens. So, yeah.
It's fascinating to think about the differences in how people express their mourning, in different cultures and communities. Like everybody processes their grief in their own way. And then that's the individual side of things. Like each person has their own experience of it. But at the same time, every community has their own way of processing it as a group based on their cultural norms, cultural understandings of life and death and that kind of thing. Like, did it seem to you, or to you and your family and the community that this, because you said he died by suicide, this was like something completely like just a unexpected shock to everyone, or like was he going through some things and there was like a chapter of, sort of like a transition he was going through in his life where people could see a decline? Like how was that? How did that all play out?
So it was a shock for like me and my family, but prior to this, and I think it's important to talk about too, especially for Indigenous peoples, because unfortunately, we have a higher, rate of suicide in our communities just for that lack of access to, those economic, systemic barriers. There's also all the cultural trauma from residential schools, the 60s scoop, and then we also have what's known as the Millennium Scoop. So a lot of Indigenous children's, in foster care systems, and those systems are being kind of removed disproportionately from their Indigenous communities and families. So I think that's important to keep in mind as we're talking about this as well. But yeah, I mean, it was a shock for me and my brothers and sisters, and my brother especially was really, really close with him. But I think it was also, it was interesting, and it was interesting to see how we kind of grieved that process and how it opened up the conversation for what that looks like in our community. Because I find for a lot of people, death especially is a really scary thing for people to talk about.
Right.
And my dad always talks about it so openly to the point where we're like, okay, this is like weird, stop talking about it. But he doesn't do it in a way to be gruesome or, to sound morbid. He does it in a way to kind of help us understand that that's just a part of life, inevitably that's where we go. And he always says, when my grandfather passed, when my cousin Garnet passed, that they go to what we call the happy hunting grounds. And in Indigenous culture, it's essentially the idea that, when we kind of die, our lives don't just end. It's kind of that cyclical nature. And when we say goodbye in our language, it's bamapi, which doesn't actually mean goodbye. It means until I see you again. So we don't actually believe in a goodbye forever.
Can I try that?
Yeah.
It was, can you say it one more time?
Yeah, bamapi.
Bamapi.
Yeah.
I probably just butchered the accent. Bamapi.
That's okay. I'm still learning Ojibwe too. So I always say, give me some grace.
When you go to school tomorrow, Jason, I'm going to be like, Bamapi.
Tomorrow.
No, wait, tomorrow's Saturday. So you're not going
Saturday.
You're not going
to
tomorrow.
school until next Monday.
Yeah, there you go. I'm taking off to Toronto tomorrow, so you're going to be saying Bamapi to me.
But yeah, I've been like picking up the language a little bit more as I go. But yeah, a lot of Ojibwe language speakers have been saying that to me lately. And I think, such a beautiful way to kind of end things, because,
right.
Instead of saying, okay, goodbye, it's kind of that idea of you won't see them. But I love the idea of thinking, it's the idea that we'll see each other again, whether it's in this life or in the afterlife and the next life, that cyclical nature again, thinking of like the medicine wheel where there's no beginning or end. And I don't want to run off topic, but
that's okay.
But when you were
whatever topics you want.
But yeah, when you were kind of talking a little bit about, I know it's a morbid topic, but death. But okay. I want to kind of reframe the way that people think about this, because it's hard for a lot of people to come to terms with. But in my culture, growing up, I've always had super, super vivid dreams. Even as a little kid, I've always had vivid dreams. And I remember telling my dad about these dreams and being a little afraid of him saying like, oh, like that's weird or that's crazy. But instead he said, that's how your ancestors communicate with you. They're telling you lessons or messages or stories, or just want to come and say hi to you. So it's important to pay attention and to listen to the messages that they're kind of telling you through that. And it's interesting that we bring this up, because the other night I had a dream about my grandfather who had passed away recently. So my dad's dad on my reservation in Swan Lake. And I remember calling my dad and just saying, I had a dream about Grandpa. It was so beautiful. Like, he was just so happy and cheery. I know we talked about that earlier. And it's interesting because when I come from these dreams, I'm never like sad and feeling like they're gone. It always just feels like they're still here with us. And I remember sharing this with him, and he just had the same reaction, like, that's so beautiful. I'm so happy he came to visit you in that dream. So I always tell people to, pay attention to your dreams, because there's so many messages in them. And, I know we're talking about kind of like the afterlife, and everyone has different beliefs. So I never shove any beliefs down anyone's throats,
Right.
Whatever you believe in, then that's what you believe in. And I think that that's beautiful, all the different beliefs and cultures. But I always say, aside from the afterlife kind of explanation, that dreams have a lot that they can tell us just about in our own lives, about if we're stressed, if we need more support, if we feel like we need rest. So always pay attention to the underlying messages in them.
So when you were talking about the varying, sort of beliefs that are out there about an afterlife, I've always been curious about this stuff, because like when I was much, much younger, all I had was, these really aggressively pushed religious ideologies from, people around me and in my immediate family and stuff like that. It's just like, and I was very young and impressionable. I didn't know what was what. And then as I got older, as a lot of people do, they start to question what they're told. They start to seek out verifiable truths about the universe and that kind of thing. And then when you start that journey, you start to, discover that there's a lot of questions that we just may never be able to answer, but you sort of like look for the meaning as you see it, as you see your life unfold, and you're like, oh, whoa, that's a strange coincidence. That's another strange coincidence. Like, where is this coming from? And then maybe you never know where it all comes from, but you explore different sort of belief systems, and then a little bit of each of them sort of speak to you. I found this fascinating article about the way our brains use quantum computing, so to speak. Like, the whole idea of, in the last, I'd say, 5 to 10 years, we've started to use or explore quantum computing to just propel our technology, I guess, into the future. And the university that I went to, University of Waterloo, when I was there, they didn't even have the School of Quantum Computing, and now they have a whole building dedicated to it, which was constructed after I graduated. So this is something that is a very, very serious advancement forward in our computer technology. And getting back to the article that I mentioned a moment ago, I was reading about how the human brain actually employs some of the same basic principles that we use in our quantum computing. And we only know this now because we've learned about what quantum computing is and how to build these things and how to use them. So what I always found fascinating about the idea of quantum information is that it never actually gets destroyed. Like, the amount of quantum information in the universe, it'll change forms, it'll travel, it'll move places, but you can never get rid of it. So I thought to myself, I'm like, okay, well, if there's some aspect of our brain function or our physical body which is utilizing some level of quantum information, and we know that quantum information is never totally gone from the universe, does that then logically mean that there is some aspect of ourselves, of our existence, that is permanent and enduring, even if other aspects of our existence is not, like the cells in our body or whatever, right? So maybe, in religion's search for the soul, the more we learn about the universe through demonstratable science, it sort of starts to tell the same story at some point. I don't know. These are just my own meandering speculation.
I love
it.
I love listening to it. And I think it's, like I said earlier, like, I appreciate every religion. I love learning about them. I think it's, beautiful, each one of them. And it's funny because when I talk to my dad about this, and I always say, do you believe in heaven? Do you think there's a God? Do you don't think there is? And I kind of, have the same idea that he has, where he says, I like to believe that there is like a creator or God, whatever divine form you believe in. When you pass, that's where you go. And he goes, but I'm also okay with the fact that, when you're out, if it's just black and you're out, that's it. And people are like, wow, that's terrible to say. Like, what a morbid thing. But I kind of said to him, I think it's beautiful that we have that peace with that, though.
Yeah.
And I think, when we talk about all these different concepts and ideologies and, way of living, the reason why, and especially the past couple of years, I've kind of been really embracing the Indigenous views and way of living, is I think there's just so much that you can get out of it. And not only that, but like I said earlier, it just provides you with so much comfort along the way, so that when you do get to that point of your life, kind of like where my dad is now,
right?
You're not feeling that panic that a lot of people fear. It's more so, that acceptance and just that comfort of knowing, okay, whatever happens, it's going to be okay. Like, this isn't the end forever. And,
right.
We live within that cyclical nature of life and the world around us and Mother Earth. And
Very cool. I feel at peace just having this conversation.
Yeah, and I talk about this with my boyfriend all the time because, he had a lot of family members pass in just like the past decade in his life, and he had a really hard time with death, and he was like, even now, I think, very scared of it, and I think so many people are.
Right.
And, just talking about these things with him, I think brought him a lot of mind, and he doesn't feel as scared of it now, I think.
Yeah.
And not to say, because we're both very young, we're going to live a very long and happy life. So we don't obviously talk about this every day, but
right.
I think it helps him knowing, that his past loved ones are still around, they're okay, everything's okay. It's a lot of comfort for him.
For sure. Yeah. I've definitely had dreams, just like what you were talking about when you had a dream about your grandfather who had passed away. I had a dream. I tell my close friends about this, and I guess I'm going to tell the whole world on this podcast now. But I'm not going to, if there's a detail I don't want to share, I'll just leave it out of the story. But to the extent that I'm comfortable sharing it, like I had a very close friend of mine pass away. We we knew each other for many, many, many years. Like we went to high school together, and then, we, life took us in different directions. She traveled the world, and, I was doing my law school stuff. But, we sort of kept in touch throughout the years, and we talked a lot. And, one day, in my early 30s, I get this call from her mom, and, she tells me, she passed away. And, it was a long grieving process for me. It was years before I really came to terms with it. And when you're telling me the story about your dream you had about your grandfather, like I was thinking, yeah, I had a dream about her. My friend's name was Nadine, and I had a dream about Nadine, and it was just the strangest, experience. I was like at this airport, and I was like sort of choosing between different paths. It was very fascinating. She was there. She wasn't saying anything. It was just sort of seemed like she was happy and at peace. She was smiling, like there was nothing wrong. And it's almost like I was the one that was a little bit like jarred, or like, what's going on? What am I doing here? Like she's all calm, and I'm like, ah. And I look over to my right. It's a very vivid dream I had. I look over to my right, and like I see like a departure gate, and like the plane's taking off, and we got to get out of here. And then I look over to my left, and I see a long hallway, not sure where it goes. Not like a dark and scary hallway. It was actually quite brightly lit, and the further I looked down the hallway, the brighter the light was actually. And I was like, do I get on this plane and leave, or do I walk away and walk down this hallway towards this light? And I walked towards the light. I know it's a super, super cliche thing to say. It sounds like I'm making it up on the spot. Literally, this is, anyone who knows me well knows I've had this experience. And I walked towards the light. And again, Nadine's reaction, like, she didn't call out to me. She didn't say, "Hey, where are you going?" Nothing. It wasn't. It was just. It was up to me, and she would have been okay with whatever I chose. And then I chose to walk down that hallway, and it was very, very healing, because I remember having that dream where the further down the hallway I got, the more calm and soothing and happy I felt. And then I woke up alone in my room, and it was just I had the biggest headache I had in my entire life. Like there was a pain in my skull, but like I think my body or my mind was processing something. And part of that, there's sometimes there's pain and catharsis. And the circumstances that led up to that was also unfortunate. In the days leading up to it, I was dealing with a pretty nasty dental infection, and a dentist I had gone to see had prescribed me with a pretty powerful painkiller. You read the news about like how some of these painkillers that people are being prescribed are like having pretty significant unintended impacts on people, and they're very dangerous. They can be very dangerous. Again, I'm no doctor. I'm not making comments on anyone's medical situation, but like we've all heard about like how serious things like opioids and stuff like that are. But in any event, I was prescribed a painkiller for this infection that I had, and I was taking it exactly as directed. And I had a pretty serious adverse reaction to that. It was causing extraordinary amounts of pain as a consequence of using the medicine. And I would have been better off had I just dealt with, the pain that I had prior to taking the medicine. So in any event, going to sleep in this state of extreme physical pain while also carrying this emotional and spiritual burden. It's almost as if like when I look back and I think about that dream, and I've told friends and family about this, when I think about that dream, it's almost like part of me was facing a decision where I had to choose to give up that fight that my body was going through, or choose to get through it and move past it and heal. And not only did my body eventually heal, but it felt like my mind and my mental health also healed as well. And Nadine was there to see me through that. And I'd never had a dream about her after that ever again, nor have I felt the crushing pain of her loss since that dream either. And this was like, I would say January of 2021. I had to put a year to it. Yeah, I think that was the time frame. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that. First of all, I was just so enticed the entire time you were talking. You're a great storyteller as
Thank
well.
you.
But yeah, I have two things I want to comment on, if that's okay.
Sure.
I think the first one, you know, I always say when our passed over, and this is getting very spiritual. So again, I always want to say, you know, whatever you believe in, 100% embrace that. I'm not pushing anything down anyone's throats. But the second thing I wanted to say was, you know, I always say when we have dreams about our passed on loved ones, they love to visit us in dreams because it's a way for us we're in a state when we're dreaming where we're not afraid, right? We're open to receiving those types of messages and seeing those people. And I always say, you know, they don't want to just show up in your bedroom and stand next to you, right? That would scare most people. So I always say they come to us in our dreams because that's a really easy way for them to communicate with us, for them to see us. And in this instance, you know, she wasn't even speaking to you, but I think just that imagery alone and similar, it's interesting because it's similar to the same energy I felt with my grandfather. And that's interesting how you connected that too, how, you know, I don't think he even said anything to me either, but it was just that energy and just feeling like they're happy, they're okay, like they're in a good place. And it was just so comforting, which I'm sure you felt as well, I think is really beautiful.
For sure. Yeah.
And I found it interesting, the imagery with the planes and the white lights. And, you know, I talked about this earlier about paying attention to those dreams and those underlining meanings, but there's something in my culture we call walking the red road. And the red road is essentially a way of explaining when we begin to embrace, you know, our mind, our body, our spirits, our hearts, but more so accepting that journey of our identity and ourselves. And, you know, pertaining to my culture, you know, embracing the culture and the, you know, just all the teachings surrounding it and being proud in that identity. And when you said that bright light in that hallway, it just made me think of, you know, walking that red road. And I know, even if you're not Indigenous, just to kind of put this into your situation, I think it was beautiful just seeing how afterwards you felt so much healing after that, because it really, you know, in my kind of way of, and I know this is your experience, but in my way of kind of, you know, wrapping my head around it, I think in a way it's you walking down that road, which allowed you to go through your own healing journey.
Oh, wow.
That. Yeah.
That's fantastic.
But yeah, I think that's beautiful.
That's very, very helpful. Right. Thank you.
No problem. I love hearing people's dreams and like giving some 2 cents.
Yeah. And you find you get to do that in your work as a coach and as a wellness expert when clients come to you and they're sharing things with you. You hear about, you know, people tell you stories about their dreams and you help them work through that and stuff.
Yeah, a lot of people when they come to me, you know, and especially people who follow me on TikTok, I talk a lot about, you know, the spirituality and all things like that. But yeah, I talk a lot about symbolism because for a lot of people, it comes up in so many different ways. It can come up in dreams. I have a lot of clients where it comes up in animals. So kind of teaching them, okay, this is what I think this might be representing to you or why it's presenting itself to you in this way.
Right.
And even like, you know, beyond that, because there's going to be some listeners who are saying, oh, this is very like woo-woo, which I always explain it. But, you know, in a more practical sense, like there's so many messages we get on a day-to-day basis that aren't necessarily through images, but can just be from our physical bodies. You know, what you were saying about having that headache, you know, in our day-to-day lives, you know, just listening to those messages from our physical selves can be really important too. You know, signs to take rest, signs to, you know, focus more on yourself. Like we have those, you know, personal cues within us that kind of are pushing us in that direction, whether we want to ignore them or not. But, you know, I always hear it over and over again, you know, you got to choose the time to rest. Otherwise your body will choose it for you. So, but yeah, that was kind of a little bit of a tangent, but
that's okay. That's why we're here. I was talking to Tracy about a topic loosely related to this, where, you know, I was talking to her about all the different things that we spend our time doing. She and I, like, we have a lot of projects on the go, you know, so and parts of our day that are dedicated to specific things that we're working towards. So, you know, we will allocate a certain amount of time to our day to go to the gym together, and we're just focused on our health and fitness for that part of the day. Then we'll allocate another part of the day where we are you know, hanging out, not just hanging out, but like we're working in our one of our investment properties, and we are, you know, measuring and cutting and painting and you know, building our financial futures through handling those investments and stuff. And then there's our day jobs and that kind of thing, you know? So there's the stuff you do from 9 to 5 to like pay the bills and whatever. And like you sort of set up your day in all these different places, and you have, depending on, you know, like who you are and how you spend your day, you have varying degrees of passion depending on the thing it is that you're doing. For some people, like the happiest part of the day, the best part of the day is when they're at the gym.
Yeah.
For some people, the best part of the day is sitting down with their family for dinner, right? And some people, you know, like we've got, you know, I'm sure lots of workaholics out there who are just like addicted to their jobs. And they don't, you know, they look forward to Monday where they can be back at the office. And, you know, I've met people like that. I used to be a person like that. So depending on who you are and what you're into and what your values are, like you're going to be more passionate or less passionate about all the different places you spend your time and things doing throughout the day. And the thing that I was really focusing on when we were chatting about this earlier today, she and I, was like, when you're tackling something where it's like you're less passionate about it, there's other places you'd rather be. You can feel it, like your body feels it. You know, it was like I was telling him, like I feel like heavier. I feel not like on the weighing scale, just like my overall sense of being. It's like I'm carrying a weight. I'm trying to focus, but like I can't maintain my focus. Like I'm just, everything about this thing that I'm doing right now is like, you know, like I can't bring that energy to the surface. And she told me, well, it's because you're not passionate about it. You know, like when you are doing things that you are passionate about, when you're focusing on things that make you happy, like you have an endless amount of energy for those. And I was like, that's so true, right? Like it's just your mind and your body, it knows what it wants. It knows what it likes. It knows the kind of work that makes it feel fulfilled. And there's, you know, there's unfulfilling work and there's fulfilling work. There's things we do for money that doesn't even feel like a job, and there's things that like really feels like a job, right? Like, and you gotta give your mind and your body what it knows it wants, and you can't negotiate with that. It's like if you try to push it into something that isn't meant for you, you're gonna feel miserable, and and there's not gonna be a lot of escape from that. Like it's gonna follow you until you do something about it. And it, you know, it wasn't just, this is not some epiphany that like Tracy and I just figured out this afternoon. I had seen this same general theme and this same sort of message told again and again on social media from like content creators who are trying to bring people's attention to this thing that like you got to do what you're passionate about, and yeah, everybody has bills to pay. Everybody's got to go to that job that they don't necessarily like or whatever. Like, I mean, I've very lucky that I've throughout my life been able to have overall a career that I've had a lot of excitement in, and I've worked a lot of different jobs, and for the most part, pretty much all of them I found to be very fascinating and engaging. And like, if anything, I probably put in too many hours working, but you know, it's important to be mindful of where your passions are and create the space to do the work, do that kind of work. And it seems to me that that's, you know, that you're lucky in that you found that for yourself and you've made it a career. And, you know, like if only more people could do that, right? Like, or maybe they hear this episode and they're like, yeah, you know what? Maybe I'm going to do that tomorrow and I'm going to start before I'm ready.
Yes,
but it's because I'm passionate about that and I feel energized when I'm doing it, you know?
Yeah. And it's exactly what you're saying, you know, and I always joke about this with my dad because I am very spiritual just by virtue of my culture, but I am also very practical. So I loved what you were saying earlier, you know, about like the mechanics of it. And I love like the science and how that integrates my work too. But so I like to think I have that balance, but I always, you know, I find it so great how you're saying, you know, those intuitive nudges, because exactly that, right? It doesn't always have to be, you know, in nature or in a dream. It can be exactly that, you know, that feeling that you have within you that, oh, maybe I should be doing something else, or I'm not as passionate about this, or exactly what I was saying earlier, you know, you may have this idea or this passion that you've been thinking about for a while, but you're just scared to kind of dive in and start it. You know, that's your body telling you, okay, that's what you should be doing. That's what you need to act on. That's what you need to start. And I had a talk with my brother not too long about this. My brother, Alex, he lives in New Brunswick right now. And,
Hi, Alex.
Yeah, hi, Alex. But yeah, and he's a couple of years older than me. But we were having a really deep conversation about this because it's interesting when you go through life and you start getting older, and exactly what you're saying, there's times where you do have to work and you do have to work hard. We live in a society where you need to make money.
Right.
And he was saying, he just felt like he was kind of moving through life, doing what society was telling him to do, getting the job, doing the things. And then he kind of reached an age in the past couple of years where he started asking himself, what do I love to do? What lights me up? And he started doing a lot of what we call, inner child healing. So kind of thinking about what did I love as a kid that I want to start doing now? And he really, pushed me to kind of think about, what's my greater purpose? What lights me on fire? Exactly what you're saying. You can spend hours doing what you love because it doesn't feel like work, like what you're passionate about. And for him, was BMX biking, snowboarding, playing the guitar, singing. So he really started to dive really deep into that. And now he's been like playing the guitar and singing all the time. And although, he works for CN, so, the singing guitar isn't his full-time gig, just recognizing, okay, what are things that I love to do that I want to just embrace and incorporate more of? And like you were saying, having that balance. So I think that's a really awesome way to kind of put it into perspective too.
Can I tell you a story? This just, oh my gosh. So from what you just told me about your brother, Alex, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So he, it's just, I just got like goosebumps. So basically when I was a kid, and this memory just came to me as you were telling me this story. I don't think about it a lot. Maybe I've thought about it 2 or 3 times in my adult life. But when I was a kid, we had these little cassette players. And you probably don't remember what those are, but like you've probably seen at least a picture of a cassette online or something. But yeah. So we have these little cassette players. You stick in the cassette. You press this button on the top of it, and the cool thing was you could actually record on some of these. I mean, a lot of them couldn't, but you press the record button, you talk into the mic, whatever. You hit rewind on the cassette, and then you press play, and then all of a sudden you're sitting there and you can hear the stuff you were just saying. And back then, that was like, I was growing up as a little kid in the early 90s. That was a big deal. Like we didn't have technology that could do that. I was like, oh my God, this is so cool. Like I would just sit there in my room as this tiny, scrawny little kid, very young, growing up in Bedford, Nova Scotia. And I would play with this little cassette player, and I would hit record, and I'd just blab nonsense into it, and I'd pretend like I was on a radio show. And then I would hit stop, and I hit rewind, and I'd listen to myself. And then I'd get like my cousins and my friends, and I'd do little interviews with them.
No way.
I'm not even kidding. I was like maybe like 7 or 8 years old, and I was doing this thing with this cassette player, and I just had so much fun doing that. Like it was more fun than playing video games and all this stuff. And as I entered my adolescence and then adulthood and everything else, those memories fade into the background. Like you forget that you used to do those things. And it was funny. I went through a similar, sort of growth journey as your brother Alex, where, not too long ago, I had to ask myself, what really makes me happy? Like what do I feel just sort of like energizes me that I could just do for hours and hours and hours? And all of a sudden here I am making these podcasts in the same vein as that 7-year-old kid playing with the little cassette player. And you can feel that inner child joy. And I didn't even understand the depth of where that was coming from until this conversation, or I think I sort of started to kind of understand it on some level at a very surface level recently, maybe in the last couple of weeks. And this is like my first opportunity where I get to sort of like really articulate it and put it into words. So yeah, thank you for giving me the opportunity to do that.
Absolutely. No, that's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. And, that's a prime example, right? Where we kind of forget, or as we get older, we kind of lose, okay, what is it even that I want to do? Or when we kind of disconnect from our work, we kind of get caught in this, again, that hustle mentality of just working and working and working. Then when you take a stop and think, you're in the present moment, you're like, okay, what is it that I do love?
Yeah.
So that's a prime example. I loved that.
That's
how
a prime
you shared
example.
that. Yeah. How you were doing that as a kid. Like, that's amazing. And it reminded me too recently, because I was looking online, and again, things just manifest into reality. But
Right.
there was this like BIPOC writers program that came up, and I used to like love writing as a kid. So I applied to this program, I got in, and I just like finished that too. But it was kind of in the same like art sphere and everything, and they're kind of doing similar work to me, but for, Black, Indigenous people of color. That's what BIPOC stands for anyone who doesn't know.
Okay.
But they were essentially kind of helping BIPOC, writers and artists kind of start their journeys, pitch book proposals in this instant. And I was like, man, this is so cool. And it reminded me when my mom reminded me, actually, she said, when you were a kid, you used to sit upstairs for hours, and I would just be writing and writing and writing. And
Yeah.
she'd always call from downstairs and be like, Grace, what are you doing? And I'm like, just writing a book. And she thought it was the funniest thing. Like, she tells this story even to this day. She's like, she'd just be up there writing a book. And I was young, like probably like 7 to 10 years old. So, exactly what you're saying, where most kids are like playing video games or doing something else. We have these like very niche passions. So I always challenge people to think about that. Like, for anyone who's listening, what is something you loved as a kid that you want to do again? And I always get asked, does it have to be like monetized or a job? And no, it can just be, like my brother's doing, just having that as a passion and a hobby and just coming back to it after all these years.
Yeah. So are you working on a book, or do you aspire to write a book one day? Or
I've always wanted to write a book. My mom always jokes that I already have, because I had technically like my first thing in my business I did was like an ebook on Instagram.
Oh, wow. Well, there you go. So you're already a published author. I guess you have an ebook. Yeah.
I guess so. But yeah, I mean, I've always wanted to write a book, and I'm not sure like how that will transpire, but I have trust that down the road somehow that will work its way in. But yeah, I think in terms of kind of connecting back to, what I loved as a kid, one of the things also was just like art. So it's kind of in the same sphere.
Yeah.
But so I recently got back really into painting. And when I went to go back into art, I was like, wow, this is really expensive. Like, a lot of supplies can be really hard to get into. So again, it was crazy because I saw online, there was this opportunity through the Ontario Arts Council. So shout out to them. Thank you so much. Where you could get some supplies for your art for Indigenous artists. So I applied, and they had sent me $500 to just go and get supplies. Wow. So that helped kickstart that journey. And then not too long afterwards, I got that opportunity for the Indigenous art cohort that I ended up hosting. So it kind of went hand in hand, and I was like, wow, okay, I'm being called to create and do more art and follow this for Indigenous entrepreneurs and artists. So I kind of just took that and I ran with it, taking those intuitive nudges. That's what I'd say.
Intuitive nudges. I need to start using that phrase more often in my life. I'm just like, how many intuitive nudges have I experienced in the last 15 years?
Probably a lot.
Probably a lot. And I'm just not paying attention. Now that I know what that phrase is and that it exists and it's real, I can start to actually be on the lookout for them. I'm like, am I receiving an intuitive nudge right now?
Yes. Yes. It's so true because, again, I talk about this a lot, but in our Western society, we're so taught to ignore them, right? Because we're kind of pre-programmed to, okay, there's only one way of thinking, doing things, this one linear way, one size fits all, you kind of get into that, and that's what you're supposed to be doing. So we, as, ourselves and kind of with our stories, we start thinking, okay, but is this what I want to do? Is this meant for me? Maybe there isn't a one size fits all, and kind of thinking back to my culture and my identity, we value everyone's gifts, I like to think, obviously in Indigenous culture now, there's a lot of struggles and barriers we're overcoming, but I like to think that at the base of our kind of teaching and values, we value that everyone has different gifts and specialties, and that's what makes us us, right?
Right.
No one is above or below each other, just like when I was talking about the medicine wheel, but instead, whatever you're passionate about, whatever you love, that's what you're meant to be doing. So pay attention to the intuitive nudges.
Yeah. The comment you just made about how most of us just sort of somehow fall into this place where we're not recognizing the intuitive nudges. We are dismissing them. We're just not taking full advantage of those opportunities. I think a lot of what's happening with the way most of us live our day-to-day life, and again, it's a generalization, but I think it explains a lot of North American society, is that we sort of literally drug ourselves into a certain routine just so that we can survive this economic system that we all sort of live in. And again, I mentioned this on a previous episode, I have a degree in economics and also as someone who studied law and everything else. And I have a very, deep curiosity for the reasons people make the choices that they make, whether those are economic choices or whether those are choices related to public order and that kind of thing. And when I think about these things, I'm like, okay, well, we're living in this economic system where the vast majority of us are waking up in the morning, and what do most people do just to be able to survive all the things that the system demands of them? Well, they self-medicate with caffeine. And caffeine is a drug, no matter how you slice it. It's a very powerful drug at that. And it's 100% legal. And then we use this drug to forget the fact that we're sleepy and we didn't get a good night's sleep or that we're tired. We use this drug to focus on tasks that most of us don't find interesting or that we're not passionate about or whatever, but it makes us productive workers. And then we do this for 5 days a week, most of us. And then to I think sort of dull the negative consequences of living like that and to sort of dull the impact of that on the weekends, we sort of sedate ourselves, a lot of people anyway, with alcohol. Yeah. So we're sort of bouncing between these two legal drugs, caffeine and alcohol, one to sort of survive the system and the other to like forget the system that we're living in. Yeah. Now, again, maybe not true for everybody, but it's true for a lot of people. And when I think about, bringing this back to the local message, bringing it back to a place of deep relevance to the Sault Ste. Marie community, I've talked about this on previous episodes where like when I spent so much time visiting the Sioux, as someone who was living full-time in the GTA and then eventually moving to the Sioux and living full-time here, I saw a wide variety of individuals. I saw people on the one hand doing great work and advancing their lives and their family's future prosperity. And that was very inspiring to see, and I count you among them. And then on the other end of the spectrum, I saw people who were struggling with addiction issues, which is unfortunately a problem, in our community, and people who are struggling with just the pain and the sadness and the monotony of life, and then turning to, drugs and other bad habits to sort of like placate or dull that pain. Yeah. So it's fascinating to me how much of our lives revolve around just sort of like getting through it all and relying on these substances that have been made legal by the powers that be for one reason or the other, to keep us, turning the machine. Yeah. And it sounds like a lot of like, crazy, the conspiracy theory shit. But I'm like, again, like to me, it points to larger question. Like, well, is there a way that we can organize society where we don't need to feel like we're constantly in a rat race and then turning to these substances to just get us through it? Is there a way to do things better? And I think those are very, those are very important questions that people need to be asking. So.
Yeah. And you know what? It's interesting you said, people say it's a conspiracy, but, at the heart of it, I don't think it's as much conspiracy as it is kind of the facts, right? I mean, there's a statistic that said in terms of, LCBOs in Ontario alone, I can't remember what it said, but every couple of kilometers or parameters, there's an LCBO.
Yeah. Oh yeah. They're everywhere.
And you know what
everywhere.
I mean? And it makes you question, okay, why is this so accessible as opposed to free mental health services for everyone, or, therapy, or, more holistic in nature. Right.
Right.
And when we talk about alcohol, this is something that unfortunately has plagued a lot of Indigenous communities and peoples, because I think, Western society identified that, okay, alcohol is something that, exactly like you're saying, can really control a lot of people's lives. And there's a teaching that we talk about a lot where when alcohol enters your body, it's called spirits, because your soul leaves your body for 4 days. And that's why when you drink, and not to say that if anyone has a drink every once in a while, that's completely okay. But
Yeah.
that's why if you drink like a lot and all the time, you may feel, hungover, or you feel really groggy or out of it, or you feel irritable. It's because, you aren't your fullest and highest version of yourself, vibrating at the best frequency possible. That's why alcohol is a depressant, right? So
Yeah.
it's very interesting that you brought that up because it's so true. And in my culture, in a lot of ceremonies, you're not allowed to have any alcohol or drugs in your system. Like, I believe, and it depends on which ones you're in, but for the one that I had gone in for Sweat Lodge, you weren't allowed to have any in your system 7 days prior. And even afterwards, you're not supposed to have any either.
I think that's great.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Just detoxing and that kind of thing. Like I know that when I was in law school, the amount of alcohol consumption was just insane.
Mm-hmm.
It was, I read about this from an academic perspective. I lived it firsthand in terms of my own sort of party lifestyle. You're in your early 20s, you're in professional school. You think you got this really, bright future ahead of you, which, if you work hard and you stick with it, then a lot of people in medical school, law school, whatever, they do have bright futures. But like at the same time, it's something that can be very easily lost because like you're in that process as a student and you're stressed out. You don't have time for friends and family. There's all this pressure. And what do people do? They turn to alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
And what I find really fascinating about that, sort of unfortunate and disappointing as well, is they get into latter stages of their career. And I don't think this is specific to just lawyers. I think this is anyone with a very high stress career. They get into latter stages of their career, and those habits that they developed in law school follow them. So they're, overworked at whatever law firm that they're working at. And these associates are being, pressured into working 12 to 14-hour days and stuff like that. And what do they end up doing? Well, their alcohol consumption just increases. So, it's rough. I don't know what the solution is. I don't know how to take a entire generation of young, overworked professionals who are like sort of drowning themselves in whatever they can to dull the senses or dull that experience. It's just, you sort of look at it and you're like, it's sad, but in your own way, in whatever small way, I guess, even if you can't solve the problem completely and for everyone, which, wouldn't that be nice? You can at least put some positive messages out there in the world saying, you know what, there is another way to deal with these feelings. There are other things you can do, with your time and with your life that can feel enriching, that can give you so much more depth than this sort of routine that you've become accustomed to.
Yeah, absolutely. And when I was at Western, I took some business courses, and I think there was one, and again, I don't like to say, don't quote me on this because I don't have it right in front of me.
That's okay.
But I think there was a stat that was talking about Gen Z and how, this next generation coming in, how a large, group of them are going to be self-starters, entrepreneurs, and especially in the digital space.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because, I'm seeing this big shift, and especially since COVID too, of a lot of people wanting to work from home and be their own bosses. And not only that, because, I always say entrepreneurship is not for everybody, and that's 100% okay. Find what you love and what you're passionate about. But for a lot of these people, it's essentially questioning exactly what we're saying. Is there another way of living? Is there something else that, I'm passionate about that I want to do? And it's kind of, a lot of people questioning the system we work in, and that's maybe we aren't meant to just, work, live, and then die. Maybe there is like another way.
Maybe there's
life.
more. Yeah.
Maybe there's more to it. So I think that's really interesting, like hearing, all those different thoughts and thinking about, the next generations and where are they going to be.
Right.
Yeah. And kind of like taking us back, because I know you're talking about opportunities, and I had something that kind of came to my mind.
Right.
I spend way too much time on TikTok. That's something that was a New Year's resolution. I was like, I got to spend less time on TikTok. So this will hold me accountable to that. But one great thing about TikTok is they have a lot of great teachings and lessons if you choose to consume the good side of TikTok.
Right.
So one of the lessons that someone was talking about on there was when you were talking about opportunities, it reminded me, which was, don't let yourself be the one who says no. And essentially what they meant by that was, in terms of getting opportunities, looking for opportunities. I know I talked a lot on this podcast today about, how something will come to me through an ad or those intuitive nudges, but don't let yourself be the one that says no. Let someone else do that for you if that is going to happen. So for example, we'll see job applications or even that application for CXC that I saw, I could have easily been like, oh, there's so many other people that will get it. I'm never going to get that. I'm not even going to bother applying, But instead I said, you know what? I'm not going to let myself be the one that tells me no. Like if that's going to happen, then I'm going to let someone else do it. So I just did it. I applied and I got in. So
it's amazing.
I say this because I want everyone else on here to feel the same way. You may feel underqualified. You may feel overqualified. You may feel, I can't do this. Just take the leap anyways. Apply for the job or seek out those opportunities because you never know what's meant for you, and what's meant for you will happen, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Don't say no to yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
when you just apply for that job. Yeah. I see what you're saying. Yeah. It's like, I've done that. Oh my gosh. I can't tell you how many times I've done that where I'm just like, that's never going to work out for me. I'm not even going to try.
Yeah.
And I think I was more guilty of that when I was much younger. And I came from a place of like, when I was in my late teens, early 20s, my self-esteem was very low, but I tried to foolishly make up for it with like a big artificial ego. And again, like who doesn't, when there's a process of maturing and growing where you get past that and you start to actually learn how to truly believe in yourself. And then you get to this place where you're like, you know what? Maybe it's going to work out. Maybe it's not, but I'm not going to be the one to close the door on myself. I'll go try this thing. And if it works, then great, and some really, really cool stuff has come from that, like when I first started getting into, content creation, podcasting and stuff like that was back in Toronto. It was a few years ago. And, I had absolutely no plan or aspirations to make it a very like formal or structured approach, where I was creating budgets for like, okay, this is how much we can afford for hardware and all this stuff. It was just like, I'll tell you the story. My buddy was just renting one of those co-working spaces, and those became very, very popular in the last 5 to 10 years.
I was just going to say, I see those everywhere now,
they're
where I
everywhere,
never saw them before.
Exactly. Yeah. Very, very like innovative way of, making revenue from small business owners who need a place to book. So anyway, so my buddy, in Toronto was one of these people who he's like, yeah, I got this, I rent this desk or whatever at this co-working space. You should come check out the space. It's really cool. So I go there and they have this whole room just set aside for podcasting. And I walk in and I see these mics and I see these like, sound suppression walls and all this cool stuff. There's this Mac, big screen on the table and stuff. I'm like, this place just looks really cool. Like, wow. Like, and I turned to him like, are we allowed to use this stuff? Is there like a fee? Is there someone I have to ask? He's like, no. If the room's empty, you just go in and you just hit record and we could just sit here and talk. And I was like, okay. So we just did that. And we just started doing that on like a weekly basis. And, I had so much fun just sitting there and like getting to know how the mixing board worked and like kind of like looking at the back of the mics and like reading the model number and the brand and all that stuff. It was fun. And, I never saw myself like doing that kind of work or anything. It was just kind of like, it's funny. The reason I bring up the story is like in the past when I was much younger, I would have looked at that and I would have been like, oh, that's for other people. That's not for people like me. I don't have that. I'm not good enough for that.
Yeah.
But it, you start to change the way you look at stuff like that. And then you create that space for actually pursuing your passions and creating opportunities. And then maybe creating something that will benefit other people where people can take the final product of what you've been able to make by pursuing those passions, and then other people can actually enjoy that, and you're enriching their lives. So I think there's a lot of wisdom in that. You said you're only 23?
Yep.
Oh my gosh. I'm just like, where did you learn all this stuff?
It's so funny because a majority of my clients think I'm a lot older than I am. And I kind of hide my age, especially when it comes to like sales calls or onboarding. Because I find as soon as I tell my age, sometimes people don't take you as seriously. But now I don't care. I just tell people and I embrace it. But yeah, I get that sometimes.
Well, no, it's one of those things where like people want to know, like, you know, you've got people who are going through things in their life that feel so complicated, that feel so insurmountable. And they, despite all of their years of life experience, are struggling with it. And then all of a sudden they have a conversation with you and they look at things in a different perspective, and it helps them tremendously, I imagine.
Yeah. And
I think what surprises people when they're sitting in that position, I bet, is that, you know, like, you know, how is it that you came to learn all of this so quickly, right? Like, I think that's the question that some of your clients might, and maybe there's no answer to that. Maybe some people are just born with it, right? Like,
yeah, I always say, you know, it's so funny because I always say there's always so much to learn. Like, I'm always open to learning and just, like I said earlier, like embracing other people's views and hearing where they come from. I think it's so interesting. But I always, you know, thank my parents and my family, especially because, you know, I feel like whereas in some families, they subscribe to this European way of not questioning things and shutting things down and putting that shame around it, my family was very open to these conversations and embracing them and that creativity. So, you know, even from a young age, like that story I said about my dreams, right? Like they allowed me to be curious as a child and ask these questions that I feel like other people weren't talking about.
right.
So then as I got older, you know, I always just found myself in very like deep conversations, whether it's with like my siblings or my parents, and, you know, just questioning like our greater purpose and how can we give back and just help other people. And even my dad, you know, growing up, he was always passionate about giving back and helping other people. Like he was in the OPP, but he also, you know, helped found a lot of Indigenous organizations. So the Ontario Coalition of Indigenous Peoples he helped with, and I'm pretty sure like the Métis Nation of Ontario he helped as well. So he was always really passionate about, you know, again, like having that balance, like knowing when to work and make money, but also, you know, giving back to the Indigenous community and what he was passionate about and what he loved. So I always kind of looked at that growing up and attending the meetings and seeing the work that he was doing and thinking, yeah, like, you know, there is a greater purpose to what we're doing, and finding those things we love, finding the things that give us meaning are so important. And my brother, like, you know, I talked about that earlier. He also like challenges that in me a lot too, is like asking me, okay, like what do you feel you love to do, or what's your kind of bigger purpose or meaning as well? So yeah, I guess I would thank like my family for that.
I think it's really cool that your dad, he was in the OPP or currently is, or
he's retired now.
Okay, he's retired from the OPP. Yeah, I think it's really cool that he did that work, because, you know, in my mind, and I don't know if I have a clear understanding of these issues, but in my mind, there must have been, at least historically, a lot of mistrust between Western law enforcement agencies and the Aboriginal communities. So it sounds like he was, you know, the work he was doing was building bridges and closing that gap between two different communities.
Yeah, absolutely. He always tells us, you know, he wanted to, because like I said, he grew up very poor, although his family did not view it that way. They had a great mindset about it. But, you know, he had the idea of, oh, I want to get off the reservation and like create what he, quote unquote, at the time, a better life for himself, which now he kind of reflects and thinks, you know, it's not better. It was just different.
Right.
But, you know, he wanted to go to school and have that good job and be able to support himself and his family. So a lot of the time, you know, when he went away and he was doing work, he would send some of that back to his parents and his family so that they could afford what they, you know, just living in life as well. But yeah, he was really passionate about being in the OPP, and he really loved, you know, the work that he did and just helping other people.
Yeah.
And it was the same thing for him. I know we were talking about, you know, inner child healing. I did an interview for him when I was in school.
Oh, wow.
And I was like just writing everything down. It was a really cool conversation, but he was saying like ever since he was 7 years old, he always said, oh, I want to be a police officer. I want to be a cop. So he kind of just followed that dream through until the end. So
that's so cool.
I mean, now he's retired, but yeah, he is really cool to have conversations with. I'm always talking to him for hours, but
you know, it's funny. Like when I was younger, I really, that was my dream career. I wanted to be a police officer.
Yeah.
When I was in law school, I went and got my security guard license, and
Mhm.
I briefly spent some time as a bouncer at a nightclub, and I would
Wow.
work shoulder to shoulder with police officers
Yeah.
who were also there making sure, everything was safe. And I would, start to chat with them and stuff and
Mhm.
ask them about their careers. And I just thought it was the coolest thing ever. And, I guess in terms of my career, I bounced around and between the two, do I want to practice as a lawyer? Do I want to be a police officer? Like, what do I want to do? And there was a lot of years of uncertainty as to like
Yeah.
which one it was going to be. And then I sort of landed wherever I landed. But I think, if I could go back and do things all over again, maybe I would have chosen law enforcement over like
Mhm.
the practice of law. But yeah, whenever I hear about stuff like that, I'm just like, oh, that's so cool. Like that's what I wanted to do.
Yeah, no, it was really awesome. And it's interesting too because my brother, when he graduated high school, he had no idea what he wanted to do. And, my family was really pushing for him to go to university, but I think it wasn't so much that they were saying, oh, you have to be going to university to be successful, as it was, you have the opportunity now to go where we didn't. You should take advantage of that.
Right.
But he ended up going into the military for a while and
Very
trained
cool.
in Sault Ste. Marie
Okay.
here at
Yeah.
the military base. And yeah, so he did that for a couple of years and now he works for CN, so he's not doing that anymore. But it was really interesting seeing like him and my dad, the similarities in military training and like OPP training, because he was also on SWAT team too. So
Wow.
it was really awesome seeing them.
Your
bond
brother
through
was
that.
like on the SWAT team?
Well, my dad was.
Your dad, sorry.
So it was really cool seeing them like bond over that and the
Yeah.
similarities and the training. And so, yeah, that was awesome to see.
That's really cool. All right, Jason, what are we on the clock?
2 hours.
Wow, look at that. Just like that.
Just gone.
I did not even notice the time go by. I feel like we just
Me
sat
neither.
down.
I know. It always goes by so fast when you're in conversation. I do this all the time with my friends. Like, I
Yeah.
hate texting because I just find it so, like, I like texting for the fact that you can get, like, messages across in this day and age. But if
Yeah.
we're trying to have a conversation, I'm like, just call me.
Yeah.
And my friends, like my best friends, like Ava and Rachel, they'll call me and we'll just talk for hours. Like it'll be 2 hours gone by and we're like, oh, okay, maybe we should go and like study or do whatever we were doing. But it goes by so fast, I always say.
No, I totally, I've had that, where you're on the phone with someone and you're like, you look at the time and it's like 4 a.m. and you're like, oh my gosh, like I've been on the phone for 6 hours. Or, like it's just, you don't even realize it. Yeah. It's just, like, I think it goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning of this conversation with the whole notion of how we're sort of built and designed for community and human connection. It's the kind of thing that energizes us. We don't even notice the time go by where, like, let's say, for example, you compare that to working some dead end job somewhere and you're staring at the clock and every single minute feels like an eternity.
Yeah.
Whereas when you're doing things that you feel, really enriches your life, things that truly make you happy, you could just sit there and do it hours and hours and hours and you wouldn't even notice. So yeah, I think a life well lived is where you can spend every day and those days feel that way. And you're just like, where did the day go? I've been having so much fun. And you have enough of those days consecutively over the course of weeks and then months and then years. And you look back on a life really well lived that people, a lot of people wish they could live.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess I have a question for you, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's more than okay. Go right ahead.
But I know you kind of talked about your journey and how, like, when you were a kid, you were really interested in one way or another doing like podcast hosting or the interviewing. So when did you feel that you kind of got those intuitive nudges for yourself? And what was that process like for you? Because I know you were kind of talking about transitioning out of what you were doing before into kind of what you're doing now. How did that kind of look for you? And what did you kind of find was hard about that and versus where you are now? It's a loaded question.
I love that question. It's a loaded question, but I love it. I'm more than delighted to answer it. It's a multi-part answer. So basically the idea is I really fully just jumped in head first into this career that I went to school for. Like I got my degree. I went out into the working world. I worked at a couple of different law firms. I was putting in long hours. I was doing what I thought I was supposed to do, going through the motions of this system, of this economy, school, job, work your face off, whatever. I was doing that. And I really started to feel sort of the weight that something wasn't right throughout my late 20s, from 26 to 30 or so. I was running from courtroom to courtroom. I was dealing with people's legal problems. I was like trying to run the accounting for my company and all this stuff. And some of it was exciting. Some of it was exhausting. Some of it was just depressing. Like I was feeling all these mixed emotions, and the years just rolled on where I was always trying to like focus on the next quarter's profit margins, focus on the next, what we call in Canada a discovery, but in America they call it a deposition, where you ask someone questions under oath, and it's not in a courtroom, but it's in like a conference room and stuff. Yeah, the next discovery session, the next mediation session. Like I was just getting so caught up in this game of, our whatever you want to refer to it as, like our system of justice in this country. And the more I did it, the more my mind was looking for ways to, on the one hand, like grow my business, but grow it in the way where I was spending less time in court. I was spending less time pouring through dry legal cases. I was spending less time preparing documents. Like I found that I was naturally being drawn towards whatever I could do to do less of this thing.
Yeah.
While at the same time growing my business. So naturally what I did is as the business grew, as I had access to more capital, I spent some of that money on hiring people who were truly passionate about their work, who, wanted nothing more than to just be, the best lawyer they could possibly be. And then eventually, hopefully one day become a judge or whatever. Like they lived and breathed that stuff in a way that I didn't. And from the perspective of hiring good people in your organization, those are the kind of people I wanted to hire. So I did, and it was wonderful. They were happy. Their clients were happy. Our bank accounts were happy. Like it was, and for me, I was like, okay, I've got people on my team who are taking care of the court stuff. What do I do? Like, how do I best contribute now as a more senior executive? And I was drawn towards the marketing, advertising, the creative side of running the law firm. And this organization grew to, a small team of like 3 or 4 people to a team of 25 people, multi-million-dollar operation, which I ended up selling just this past December, and moving on to the next chapter of my life, which we're sitting in right now.
Congrats.
Thank you.
That's exciting.
But I found that in those years, especially those years leading up to the sale of the firm, where my mind was naturally being attracted to was marketing and advertising. And I had to ask myself, why? What is it about that got me so much more motivated to get up in the morning versus like going to a courtroom?
Yeah.
And I found with marketing and advertising, it was a lot about human relationships. It was a lot of teaching and content creation and educating the public about their rights through video content on YouTube. And you have this space to do things differently in an industry that's still very old fashioned and very dry. And you could also, it was sort of a way for me to feel like a creative artist in an industry that just didn't have a space for that, didn't have a place for that. So I did that for a while. And for a while, I saw the fruits of that and the benefits of that, because the more I honed my digital marketing skills, an area that you're very highly experienced in, my digital marketing skills, my web design skills, my video content creation skills, my social media skills, I kept honing that and working within that sort of creative space I was making for myself. And the more I did that, the more the company grew. The more clients we had, the more lawyers we had to hire, the more revenue we had. And I think the final step for me was also the scariest one, the most terrifying one, the one where after you take that step, there's no looking back after that. And that step for me was the sale of the firm. You know, and again, it's funny, you know, I told you earlier in this conversation that my parents thought that it was just the silliest idea to start my own business.
Yeah.
They thought I was being reckless. And I think you know where I'm going with this. When it came time to sell the firm, they thought that was a terrible idea. They were like, you built this amazing thing. Like you've done what people only dream of doing.
Yeah.
And now you're going to get rid of it. You're going to sell it. Like you're going to just give this thing up. And I'm like, I don't see it as giving up anything. I see it as, you know, from a business perspective, I'm receiving a very, you know, handsome payment for the sale of my shares. But what I'm gaining in terms of the non-monetary stuff is so much bigger in ways that I can't even begin to articulate or explain to them, right? I get this space and this opportunity to commit myself to creative work in ways that I never could before.
Yeah.
And just moving to a new community was a big part of that, because I felt like I had done everything that I wanted to do in like the big city world. You know, when I got my license and I set up shop in a place like Mississauga, like 1 million people living there, right next door to downtown Toronto, I'm like, this is the place to do commerce. This is the place to start a business, to get clients, to hire people. Everybody wants to live here. Let's do this. And that, you know, one of my dreams was to like put my name up on the side of a big office building and stuff like that. And I did that. And it was like, I did all this stuff and I'm like, something doesn't feel right. You know, so this doesn't feel the way I thought it was going to feel. I thought it was going to feel like more than this. And so I packed up and left. I left the big city. I came to a small place.
Wow.
I left the company. I left it all behind me to hit the reset button on my life. And now, you know, it's so incredible, because when I asked myself, does it feel like I thought this was going to feel like? Now the answer is yes.
Yeah.
And it wasn't yes before.
I love that. And you know what? Thank you for sharing, first of all.
Thank you for asking.
I love that. But the other part of that too, that I always remind people is, you know, because I feel like when I ask people, and especially in this conversation, you know, the greater purpose, what you loved as a kid, what to incorporate, thinking outside, it overwhelms a lot of people, because then they feel as though, okay, I have to find all of a sudden what I'm passionate about. I have to try and monetize that and have to do that forever. And I think your story kind of shares, you know, that's not the case. You know, you can be multi-passionate and you can have a passion for different things and you can change your mind at any time. You know, that's the beauty of the world that we live in, right?
That's the beauty of it.
You can change your mind, you can do different things, and, you know, it can be really scary, but ultimately, you know, those nudges when you're feeling unfulfilled or you know what the next step is, you just got to take the leap and do it, because I can definitely relate. I mean, I didn't have to sell a business that was of that caliber, so I can only imagine that was a bit more.
Maybe you will one day.
Stressful.
You're just starting your journey.
But, you know, when I was in university, and I remember like hiring my first business coach, and I was paying like thousands of dollars. That was a lot at the time. And I remember calling my mom, and, you know, I always feel like we need that permission to do something instead of just trusting ourselves, right?
Yeah.
And I remember calling her and saying, you know, I want to do this. I don't really know how I want to work online, but I just know that like that's my calling. Like I really want to be in that space. And I said, and I think this person can help me do that. And, you know, my parents are so loving. They love me so much, but almost like to a fault, right? They're so exactly like your parents, right? Kind of questioning, are you sure that's what you want to do?
Yeah.
My mom goes, oh, that's a lot of money. You know, I don't think you need that. I think you're doing fine on your own. Just keep doing what you're doing. And I kind of said, I have no idea how to like turn into a business though. Like that's a lot bigger. And I didn't really have that accountability. This is someone who knows what they're doing.
Right.
And so, you know, I took that leap. And since then I've invested in so many mentors and coaches, and, you know, all of it I kind of just seen as so beneficial, and I wouldn't be where I am today without it. But
right.
Exactly like you said, taking that first step is so scary.
Yeah.
And I even remember like my first sales call being so scared to ask anybody for money. Like it was just like, I was only 18 years old and no one else my age was really doing that. So
right.
being able to do that just like in my dorm room, I remember feeling so scared. And now I'm just like, I love sales calls. This is so fun because you just get to help people, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just so interesting how, our parents have so much influence on us and how, they love you, but at the end of the day, what's best for you. And they're always in that space of worry and fear for you. So
Grace, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. I've just been able to learn and absorb so much from what you've had to share, and it was a two-way street. I wasn't just absorbing, but you asked me certain questions and really had me unraveling things that I've been wanting to talk about as well. And it's just been an incredible evening. I think our viewers are very lucky to have been able to spend this time with you. And thank you. And I'd love to have you back sometime.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Soo Podcast.
Follow us on Spotify, Facebook, YouTube, and TikTok. And be sure to check out our website at soopodcast.com. That's SOOpodcast.com.